This is the Tom Bigby Tales, and I'm your host, Shannon Evans. I write about a small town in northeast Mississippi on the Tombigbee River called Columbus, and sometimes I write about the rest of the state. Tonight, I'm here to bring my fellow Lowndes County um, former resident, Bernie Ellis, whose family has been here for 7 generations. He is a graduate of Vanderbilt, UT Austin, Stanford, and UC Berkeley. Bernie, tell us a little bit more about your background because I know you as Dr. Ellis.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I am a retired epidemiologist. I had about a 40-year career, starting when I helped run the federal government's anti-tobacco effort at the National Cancer Institute in the Carter administration, and then moved to working on the early days of the HIV AIDS epidemic as a program director both in Tennessee and at the Centers for Disease Control. And in 1991, New Mexico recruited me to set up what turned out to be the first research unit within any state Department of Health to look at substance abuse as a public health problem. So that was a very interesting period. I've been retired now for about a decade and now live in Taos County, New Mexico, where I raise high quality Timothy clover hay and do a variety of volunteer efforts with the local tribes and communities.
Wow, so you have a very extensive background.
Oh, I would say that happens when you're overeducated and live to be 74.
Well, I want to talk about the W. You and I have been having some interesting conversations and with each other and other people and people in our community. What is your interest in the success of the W?
Well, I think like all Lowndes Countians, I have a number of family members who were educated there, including a distant male relative who I think was in the first class to graduate males from the W. So I have that experience, but regardless of family connections, anyone who grew up in Columbus should be very proud that we have two um, uh, amazing distinctions. The first is that Franklin Academy was the first public school chartered anywhere in the state of Mississippi. Before that, children either were educated at home or in privately funded schools. And then, second, the W, as we all know, was the first publicly funded college for women anywhere in the country, and I dare say perhaps anywhere in the world. Again, before the W, if women wanted to be college educated, they needed to be from families with sufficient wealth to be able to send them to private schools. So the W's role in helping crack the educational glass ceiling for women and thereby allowing women to begin to move beyond their role as chattel is something we all should be proud of. And in my professional career, I've often, had to deal with prejudices about Mississippi, uninformed prejudices about Mississippi, and to be able to call on those two facts normally quieted who my uninformed opponents in those discussions. So I think we all have a real stake in supporting the W and getting it through what appears to be a serious crisis in mismanagement and misplaced priorities right now.
Can you elaborate more on what you mean by mismanagement and misplaced priorities?
Well, I can. I imagine I became informed of the name change brouhaha through one of my high school classmates who was a W graduate and probably read the first information on her Facebook page. And so as I followed up myself and engaged in the local debate there, one of the things that struck me immediately when when I watched the live broadcast by WCBI at the initial naming colloquium, when the Brightwell name was floated. Well, in reading the comments, as I remember, there perhaps was only one person who was defending the decision. One student after another, one alumna after another, one community member after another was just aghast at what was going on. So the Clarion Ledger newspaper ran an online poll where they asked people to vote yay or nay on the Brightwell name, and I think the poll ended up getting over 11,000 respondents with a greater than 80% opposition. And as I read the comments that were posted with that poll, I'd like to read, if we've got the time,
Absolutely.
what a current W student posted. And all I know is her first name is Haley. She didn't post her last name. And this is what Haley wrote. The problem is not the name. The problem is the people who follow me to my car. The problem is the beggars who have literally cornered me inside the gate to beg for money. The problem is the out-of-date dorms. The problem is how my friend in the honors dorm constantly has no air conditioning or heating due to it breaking down all the time. And the best the W could do was give her a roll-around heater. The problem is how nobody wants to dorm in the back dorms due to everything that happens back there. The problem is how the gates are not truly secured at night. The problem is the lack of communication between departments and offices. And then it's somehow my fault as the student when something goes wrong and no one communicated that to me. The problem is how no one listens to our complaints and just assumes the reason no one wants to enroll is something as stupid as our name. I literally hear students beg their friends all of the time, saying this campus is unsafe, go somewhere else. But go ahead and change the name. I'm sure it magically fixes everything else. I'm so tired of this campus refusing to take care of its students, but it gladly will waste this much money on rebranding. And that's the end of her statement. And, that just floored me when I read that. And ever since, I have reposted this student's comments a number of times, and I have yet to have anyone either involved in the management of the university or defending the name change to respond to these comments. Instead, what I've seen are dozens, if not hundreds, of comments in the various places where this issue is being discussed, validating these concerns. And, um, you know, uh, changing a name is putting lipstick on a very obese pig. And if anything, uh, will depress applications rather than address the application decline. So that's what I mean by misplaced priorities. Students are not applying because high school students aren't applying because their upperclassmen at the W are saying, go somewhere where it's safe to walk the campus. Go somewhere where the rooms have heat and air conditioning. I mean, come on, administration, listen to your students. And one thing I didn't mention in my career is I actually started my career at Vanderbilt as the assistant dean of admissions. So I held that position for 3 years before entering graduate school. So I'm intimately familiar with the process of informing and recruiting students into colleges and the challenges thereof. And unlike the W at Vanderbilt, we had an administration that listened to its students and addressed their concerns while I was a student at Vandy. And my cadre of students were quite concerned about how universities manage themselves, how decisions are made. Our chancellor listened to us and actually made, along with our faculty senate, made students active and voting members of every university committee. I was made a voting member along with two other students of the university's admissions committee. And at the time, Vanderbilt admitted 3 males for every female. And the students on that committee successfully argued that we were diminishing the quality of our student body by setting different standards for males versus females. Got the university to change that policy. And the quality of incoming students was enhanced overnight. I also, when I took the job as the assistant dean, was assigned the task of recruiting and enrolling minority students at a time when, colleges in the South were really just integrating. So I'm aware of, the challenges of, addressing students' concerns about an institution. And what Vanderbilt was fortunate to be able to do was to say, hey, we're the first university in the South to have offered athletic scholarships to Black athletes. We beat everyone else in the Southeastern Conference doing that. So, you go with your strengths. And I think the W has amazing, has a cadre of strengths that are literally being ignored rather than emphasized. And the two that I would focus on clearly are the historic nature of the college, and secondly, the fact that the W has admitted men for 40 years. And a number of those men are quite vocal supporters of the W and quite vocal supporters of not changing the name. So, the issues that need to be addressed are the ones being ignored. And frankly, the president and others are hanging their hats on a name change, suddenly, changing the perception of the university. in terms of the applicant pool. What it's going to do is depress the number of applications. No one applies to a college they've never heard of. Mississippi Brightwell or whatever they call it. You don't apply to a school you know nothing about. And any interaction with potential students is immediately going to pivot to, well, we used to be Mississippi University for Women. And I imagined a conversation there where a student would say, okay, I've heard of the W and I've heard of your groundbreaking work. Why on earth would you change your name to get away from that? And the conversation proceeding with this fictitious student to say, but I also know people who've gone there who either have transferred or are planning to transfer because of the dismal state of the campus. So those are the conversations that are going to take place, and the presence of a new name won't change that conversation other than perhaps to confuse applicants and depress the applicant pool.
Well, I think all of this is clearly part of the problem. It's my understanding, and I do not have this actually from the W. I read it in an article. So the validity of it, I cannot vouch for. But based on the number of students I see on campus, I think it might be very close to the truth. I know there are less than 3,000 students enrolled. I'm pretty sure that's the numbers they published. It's my understanding there were only 88 freshmen who enrolled this past fall.
Oh my God.
Now,
yeah.
I could be wrong, but
Yeah.
I got that on pretty good authority. I've actually seen it in 2 places. But here's what's really shocking to me. There was a previous attempt to rename it. I think they were going to call it Renova or something. That's been, I don't know, years ago, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 7 or 8. But in the recent times, the executive director of university relations, and I can't remember her last name. Her first name's Annika. She is responsible for 2 failed naming attempts as the head of marketing and PR. And now we're looking at a possible third with this. It looks like it's going to be Windbridge State University of Mississippi or Windbridge, Mississippi State, something. They got to have Mississippi in the name or it won't make it through. It still has to make it through the legislature. So whatever they've chosen still has to be, cleared. But how can someone who is allegedly responsible for marketing, PR, the web, all of that, go through this process 2 times and possibly a third one without listening to any marketing professionals? And now,
right.
Go ahead.
Well, or listening to the vast majority of students and alumni and community members, all of whom are saying, for a host of reasons, you're going in the wrong direction. I mean, that's, to me, the first criteria for an effective university administrator is the ability to listen. And from where I sit, it definitely looks like there are more than a few people who need to take the cotton out of their ears and put it in their mouths. I mean, all you would need to do is sit in a room for several hours at a computer terminal and count the yays versus nays in half a dozen or more discussion arenas around this to know they're going in the wrong direction.
Well, what's interesting to me is there doesn't appear to be any leadership. It just seems to be, let's throw a dart, and then we'll put Nora Miller up. Now, another W grad who's the president, but I don't see any leadership. She just goes up and goes, okay, we've come up with a name and well, we're going to reveal it. And then after 18 months, everybody went, "What in the hell did you come up with?" And Brightwell, I mean, it sounds like we're all going to a dental school now. And
Right.
then, we've gone through two marketing teams, 24 months, how many thousands of dollars? And the irreparable, probably, damage to the university's reputation and its good name. And you've burned through so many alumni who are just appalled. And then, add to that, now they've hired someone to do branding. I guess they're doing internal branding. I'm not really sure. The W made a big announcement of this person. And yet, when you go to look, they have absolutely no experience with branding of a university or a large corporate entity. They don't really even have a web presence. Their statement is they don't need a web presence because they do everything by word of mouth. But there's nothing that validates why this person is the person for the job, except she's a third generation W graduate. You know what?
Well, and
I'm a
yeah,
third generation, but and I've written books on search engine optimization, and I've worked at colleges and universities in various roles. I've worked in recruiting, I've worked in admissions, I've worked for some major universities doing instructional design teams and building platforms for students for online learning. No way in the world does any of that make me qualified to be branding a university.
and my frustration again from a distance was seeing how a much larger team of competent and experienced marketing professionals pulled together the campaign to change the name to the W Mississippi University. And even though they were given and put together an excellent visual presentation, and even though they, with much effort, were given an audience, their suggestion was summarily dismissed.
It's my
So,
understanding that that's the person that they pulled on to do the branding now and is absolutely in love with Windbridge or whatever because it's a W. So
right,
now, rather they've, I don't know. We could say this person has gone to the dark side. I don't know.
right.
I think
Well,
it's just it's blows my mind that all of a sudden
and
the the W hired the person who was their loudest person against how they were doing the name change, and then they joined the team. So maybe they think they're going to change it from within. It was a nice presentation, but it was not branding.
right. Well, and what frustrates me, um, you know, we've got several issues here. One is the loss of current students and the diminishing application pool, and that's quite definitely tied to the real issues on campus, which have to do with safety and deteriorating facilities. And from my perspective, if the leadership embraced its history, its groundbreaking history, rather than run away from it, I mean, I can myself name a number of foundations and women-centered philanthropists, and quite likely, women supportive corporations or corporations managed and directed by women, all of whom would be ideal audiences for a massive national fundraising campaign to address some of these fundamental issues. I mean, I mean, these days, I would approach two right off the bat. Melinda French Gates, who, in her divorce from Bill Gates, got roughly half of his fortune, and has already already given away over $3 billion to worthy causes. And these days, with the Super Bowl happening tomorrow, Taylor Swift is a billionaire who's quite women-centric in her career, and I have read with the bat of an eye has given away over $50 million to the food banks in the cities where she's done concerts in this country.
Correct.
Those two people alone have fortunes at their disposal, and if the W would embrace its history, they would be willing and receptive audiences. But it all goes back to what we've touched on several times now, which is mismanagement.
Well, and that goes back to let's talk about mismanagement. The foundation that is funding, my understanding, the foundation is what's funding this name change. The foundation had a windfall last year of $25 million in their fundraising. $25 million. So money isn't the issue. How is it being spent? Because
how was that money spent? Do you other than on the renaming?
I don't know. I haven't had a chance to. I mean, I haven't done an in-depth dive, but to my knowledge, what is it supposed to be? I mean, enrollment keeps falling, but they have all this money. So you have an alumni. You have the executive director of alumni and development, which is a university position. You have ineffective recruiting. You have an alumni association. That's a distinct entity. Then you have the MUW Foundation, which is a legally separate entity, and its sole purpose is financially supporting the university. So
why aren't the lights on? Why isn't there heat? Why are there no security guards on campus? I mean, again,
well, the security guards stay in their from my understanding, is security guards used to be mobile a lot more, and they have golf carts and whatnot. Back in the day, they had cars. I don't know if they still have MUW vehicles. I do see some in golf carts, which is fine. It is a small campus. But where, why are they sitting in their building across from the Goose, the student center, instead of moving around and being present and obvious? It seems to be there in the middle of the campus, and the problems are securing the peripheral edges.
Right. Well, and it's so frustrating that, given that fact, I've read multiple parents posting online that they do have children at the W now, but because of the safety and bad dorm situation, they're getting their degrees completely online. I mean, come on, folks. The problems are staring you in the face like a beggar who won't take no for an answer, and you're traipsing around spending $750,000 to come up with names that, in the case of Brightwell, is English slang for a sex addict. And I understand at least one of the names now being considered might have legal problems because of an author publishing using the same name. So, I mean, even fundamental vetting doesn't seem to be happening. So,
well, I think, with a simple Google search, a friend of mine sent me, she said, she found a subdivision in Georgia, a farm in Pennsylvania, a beer company, a book series, an LLC in Virginia, a financial firm in California. All of them named Wynbridge with WYNBRIDGE. It's a copyrighted name in various ways.
Right.
how are they going to get around it? This is going to be expensive. It's going to be more than just this branding. It's going to be a nightmare.
Right. Well, and I'm communicating with a few of, again, my old high school classmates, and I'm suggesting, you know, we're at a point with the level of frustration among students and alumni and community members that the, this next grand reveal of the new name is an excellent opportunity for some direct action. And if I were an alum who supported the history of the W and wanted to keep its name, I'd round up dozens, if not more, of my friends to attend that renaming 2.0 event, and I would invite television stations to be there, and in mass, I would encourage everyone there with me to take out their checkbooks, pull out a check, rip it up, and drop it at Nora's feet. This is we're frankly, I think, at that point
Well,
where
I agree, but how do you address some of the 30 somethings, 30 to 40 somethings who are of the belief that the old guard is just stuck in and want to be the old guard, want to be the old ways? It's not about the old ways. What is the greater issue here of why it's the this naming process is just so insulting?
right. Well, I would say to those 30 to 40-year-old people, you're concerned, you're laying blame on the old guard. Talk to the students, ask them what their priorities are, ask them, in one case, ask them why they're there. And I think a significant number of students would say we're here because of the history, and we're also here because there are excellent programs that we came to study with. But if you listen to those students, they'll also say, but there comes a tipping point where you can't get an education if you're worried about your safety. You can't, get an education when you're having to sleep under 6 blankets at night to keep from freezing to death in your room. I mean, this isn't rocket surgery by any means. And if I really, again, from a distance, I'm holding out hope both that the alumni and current parents are fed up with this and will expand their comments beyond the internet. And again, I think when this renaming happens, I think turning that to the advantage of the real priorities that need to be addressed, is an opportunity that should be taken. And beyond that, and I understand this is going on, I think the real conversations need to be elevated to the legislature, to local legislative leaders, and to the university governance structure of the state. Um, and I wish everyone the best. I understand those conversations are going on. So, but again, as a proud community member, you know, the monies are being wasted. The priorities are absolutely upside down. And given your experience and mine, a new name is going to make recruitment harder, not easier.
Agreed.
Um, and so unless, as someone suggested quite darkly, this is an effort to hasten the demise of the W, which I hope is not the case.
I have asked that in more than one forum. It makes me think that it's
well,
almost as if they want it to fail. I mean,
exactly. I mean,
this
looking at it from a distance, you're doing everything possible to keep the day-to-day lives of students unsafe and uncomfortable, and wasting money on renaming it the university as a toothpaste brand. So, I'm again quite thankful that I dealt with in my own education, undergraduate education, a receptive administration who listened to us, shared the yoke of university governance and empowerment with us. And I mean, right now, my alma mater is ranked 13th of all universities in the country, and I think it's that history of correct priorities and inclusiveness, and addressing the real needs that should be a model for success everywhere, including at the W.
well,
And
I often wonder if when the W had started this and before they made their announcement, or maybe as they were making their announcement, people might have been more receptive. The first naming process when they came out with Brightwell, it wasn't on any wasn't on any form I ever saw. They just pulled that out of their hat. So now they came back with wind bridge, wind something, and this made up word that win is an old English or whatever. It's like it might be Welsh, but um it was a stretch, but okay, they came up with the W name. It might have been more palatable for a lot of people. If they didn't even give people an option other than their three options. There's no fill in the blank, there's no none of the above, or you had to choose one of the three that they gave you. But perhaps if they had stated somewhere in their survey or in one of their announcements that they would sign a pledge that they would still, at least inform incoming freshmen of the rich history of this school. I mean, it's an immensely rich history. I mean, if nothing else, put in orientation. It probably already is an orientation, but if they had at least told that to the alumni, then the alumni would probably have backed off some and not been so vocal because they feel unheard and they feel forgotten and pretty much made redundant, just unimportant, and that the history of those who've come before and the hard things that they fought for at that school, and once they left that school with those educations, they went into certain career fields and they, broke through many ceilings and barriers, and they feel like they're forgotten and made unimportant by a sweeping change that gives not even a wink, much less a nod to its rich history. And I think if they felt heard and seen and remembered, they might have tolerated more of this, and then less money would have been wasted on this, and maybe they could have spent it on the students having proper heat and air conditioning and whatever else students need, but primarily they could have concentrated on safety.
Well, and if they had done something as simple as the Clarion Ledger's second poll, which is still active now, which gave respondents a chance to choose, among the three proposed names, but had a fourth choice, which was keep the name as is. If you looked at that poll, and I did again this morning, over 6,000 respondents 76% of whom say keep the name we have now. I mean, this isn't complicated, folks. And no, in fact, I think most of the comments I've read on the poll that was sent to alums and others, people just felt insulted. I mean, everything was forced choice among the three names that they were floating. I mean, there was absolutely nothing truly, not recruiting, but encouraging open input by the respondents. So all of this just looks like it's following exactly the opposite ways that you would behave if you truly wanted input. They're not looking for input. They're looking, I think, for two things. They're looking for a rubber stamp, and they're looking to exhaust the students and alums. And, there's a point at which if you exhaust those two audiences, you're not going to have anyone at the university, and you're not going to have any money coming in from the natural source of resources. So again, we sort of come back to, the question of a few minutes ago. If the goal is to shut the university down, you're going in the right direction. If the goal is to save the university and build once again on its historic strengths, you're doing everything wrong to accomplish either of those things.
There seem to be an awful lot of egos involved, and I find it interesting that the university president has been so quiet on all of this since the fiasco of naming the new name at, what was that, at convocation, whenever it was. So they've spent the last 3 weeks in panic mode. So part of the reason they're in this panic mode is because they have to, the deadline to get things on the state legislature, the bill up for them to accept the new name change. That's coming up pretty quick. It might be March 1st, but it's coming up real fast. So part of this, I think, was a knee-jerk reaction. They had to do something. They did something quickly. And it's an they're crying ugly on their way to the finish line.
Well,
and that finish line could be the finish line.
Right, it could be. In fact, instead of responding to the complaints by opening the process, they're doing the opposite. Again, one of my high school classmates said she attended a meeting in Jackson in the last several weeks that was, I guess, a regular meeting of the alums down there, and there were the president was there and others, and they were told quite explicitly, any discussion of the name change issue is not on the table at this meeting.
Whoa!
Now, exactly.
Who was hosting this?
The university was hosting it, and the
Holy
audience
shit.
were
So they really don't care what you
alums.
think.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how on earth can you take the most heated and controversial issue bubbling right now and say we will take no questions on that issue? Again,
oh, so they just want platitudes. Got it.
Right. I mean, the best vote is often with your feet. And if I had been at that luncheon and been instructed that way, I would have gotten up and left.
Well, you know what this makes me think of, Bernie? This smacks of pretty little girls. You don't know what you're talking about anyways. We know best for you. So you need to sit down
right?
and be quiet. I mean, this
Yeah,
is,
exactly. They're treating the women of the W um, as if this was pre 1844,
yes.
and they were chattel again. They were property. They were second class. They were children.
And just like then, there were women who said, "Yes, that's right, we are." Well, guess what? There are still women today who don't want to, they don't like questions and they don't like you when you ask hard questions or you state facts. So here's a
Right,
fact we
right.
don't know. The W announced in the newspaper today that Windbridge was the most popular of the three choices. I'm betting you that's going
And
to be the
and
new.
it got on this Clarion Ledger poll. It got, I think, less than 20% of
Well,
the
but it
total vote.
says there are no numbers, there's just a name. And that's so
Right,
typical. The last time, everything, we've never gotten numbers. They're not
right.
very forthcoming with numbers.
Yeah, what I would have asked as a social scientist was, let me see the breakdown of the responses for all of these names. And by the way, somehow or other, I got to take that survey myself. I don't know how, but I was able to access it online. And let us know what the number and percentage of respondents that said strongly disagree, because I've read, dozens of people who've taken the survey who said the only response I gave them on the three name changes was strongly disagree.
I bet they got thrown
So,
out.
well, or again, as you say, they're simply not releasing the numbers. They're picking a name that very likely ended up with less than 20% support only because it got more support than the other two. Well, none of the above is a choice in a free country. And an
Well,
open university.
I'm gonna tell you, my experience at the W is free speech is not encouraged.
Well, the if I were the parent of a student right now, the W is giving me lots of reasons not to send my child there. And, the longer this plays out, the more the, the, the platitudinous rap that covers, the W is unraveling, and it's unraveling faster. And this could be stopped. The collapse of the university could be reversed, but again, it takes open and honest discussion. It takes listening to the relevant audiences and acting on their wishes, not ignoring their wishes.
So,
And
so Bernie, are you aware of how many buildings are condemned on campus?
I'm
I,
not.
I
No.
think they were hit by tornado. I'm pretty sure all the ones that are condemned were hit by tornadoes. Two of them are
Mm-hmm.
large dormitories. One of them is Fant, and I can't remember the other one's dorm. But they're right there in the center of campus. They're really close to where the new culinary building went in. That they spent I mean, it's a beautiful culinary building's beautiful. Um, they don't have the enrollment that they thought it would bring. Um, but for all the millions they've spent on it, hopefully long term it'll show up. The other one is at the end of Callaway. I think it was called Orr. It's the old chapel that's on the west end of the big of King Cannon, or is it King Cannon? Excuse me, not King Cannon. Callaway Hall, and the whole long front of the building. If you're facing the clock tower, it's the building to the right. And it's a beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
it had a stage with a little theater area and a chapel. I think that's where that Brightwell uh stained glass is. But that chapel and that stage, they didn't tarp it properly or something, so all that wood, everything in there is destroyed, and I guess it's gonna have to be torn down. But it's for as long I've been back in Columbus 3 years now, almost four,
Hmm.
and it is still closed and condemned. And the dormitories are still closed, and they have holes in the roof.
Oh goodness.
And and
Um,
and I can understand. I mean, there's not been a new dorm built in forever, but what did they do with the money they got from the federal government for the damage? I know they repaired Callaway and the clock tower, and they did do good preservation work on those front buildings, but it's incomplete, and I don't understand
right.
why. And I would
Well,
think as a foundation, that would be my priority, not renaming.
right. Well, I'll tell you, I certainly hope this gets worked out. I am reminded that as beautiful a place as I live, there are also bears and mountain lions, and my dogs have been going nuts for 5 minutes
Oh dear.
outside. So, are we at a good point where we could close, you think?
Yes, we are. We are at an excellent point where we can close. Bernie, I want
Okay.
to thank you for coming on, and I hope we can continue this conversation, and I really appreciate your time and your energy.
Well, I appreciate it too. And again, as a Possum Town proud son of the W, I hope we can not only save it, but enhance, improve, and expand it. And
I
I'd
agree,
be more than
100%.
happy to. I'd be more than happy to buy a ticket to Taylor Swift's next concert to get the word to her and Melinda French Gates and everyone else that um, the the W is a jewel that needs to be polished. It doesn't need to be hidden under a condemned basket, which is where it and a frivolous name change. So,
I'm
good
with
luck
you on
back.
that.
All right, good luck back there, and holler at me if I can ever do anything else.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, and I appreciate your time. This is Shannon Evans,
Okay.
and this is Shannon Evans and the Tom Bigby Tales. Until next time.